Welcome back. The debate over the removal of Confederate monuments is growing increasingly ugly, and even criminal vandals have struck a number of memorials across the country. And just this morning, in fact, Duke University made the decision to remove a statue of General Robert E. Lee that had been defaced there. While the fight over removing these symbols is nothing new, it has been given new life in the wake of the deadly violence in Charlottesville. CNN's Nick Valencia reports.
It's not just in the South. This week across America, symbols and monuments to the Confederacy were either taken down or vandalized, sparking the fight over several hundred Confederate monuments and symbols. In Brooklyn, New York, groundskeepers outside the St. John's Episcopal Church removed 2 commemorative plaques for Confederate General Robert E. Lee. They were expected to be relocated to a church museum. Reactions were mixed.
Because of this man, 300,000 Americans were killed.
At some point, you got to move on, and you can't do stuff like this. This is crazy.
No fascist USA!
Earlier in the week in Durham, North Carolina, demonstrators toppled the statue of a Confederate soldier. 7 protesters were arrested. Out west in Arizona, state and local officials woke up Thursday to an extensively damaged Confederate monument along the Jefferson Davis Memorial Highway.
That's my family there.
People like David McAllister are trying to protect monuments like this one in his hometown of Tampa Bay. He leads a group called Save Southern Heritage.
Our agenda is the mainstream agenda of cherishing American history.
Elected officials in New Orleans recently removed several Confederate monuments. Mayor Mitch Landrieu thinks those who support them endorse oppression.
These monuments celebrate a fictional, sanitized Confederacy, ignoring the death, ignoring the enslavement, ignoring the terror that it actually stood for.
Last week's deadly violence in Charlottesville, Virginia, magnified the issue again. And in the wake of it all, the president's comments seemed to only widen the gap between opposing sides.
I wonder, is it George Washington next week, and is it Thomas Jefferson the week after? You know, you really do have to ask yourself, where does it stop?
Nick Valencia, CNN, Atlanta.
So let's bring in CNN presidential historian Douglas Brinkley for a more in-depth conversation on all this. So, Doug, these monuments, they will always be a part of American heritage. But as a historian, what do you think is accomplished by taking them down?
Well, nothing's accomplished by taking them down illegally, like what happened in Durham, and you're seeing all these people getting arrested for vandalism and defacing the monuments. Don't do that. However, we've hit a point in the 21st century where we have to do some deconfederation. You know, they did it after World War II in Germany, the de-Nazi movement to get rid of swastikas and the like. And we've seen Confederate flags going down after Charleston. And now some people are going to be taking down Confederate monuments. The right way to do it was what Duke University did. They did it in a way that was calm and appropriate, and it's gone now. The showdown, Anna, as I see it, however, on this issue, I mean, states in the South aren't going to be taking down their Confederate statues on their lawns next week. But I do think the U.S. Capitol has Confederate statues, and Congresswoman Barbara Lee from California and New Jersey Senator Cory Booker are starting to move for this fall to try to get rid of those out of the U.S. Capitol. And I think that's going to be a significant fight, and we'll see how that unfolds.
The president has certainly made clear where he stands on this issue. He tweeted this week, "Sad to see the history and culture of our great country being ripped apart with the removal of our beautiful statues and monuments. You can change history. You can't change history, but you can learn from it." Robert E. Lee, Stonewall Jackson. Who's next? Washington, Jefferson? So foolish. Also, the beauty that is being taken out of our cities, towns, and parks will be greatly missed and never able to be comparably replaced. So when President Trump says things like, is George Washington next? I mean, not that there is a direct parallel here between the president, and a former president, and a general, but is he playing on people's fears that America's history is really at risk or of being rewritten or even erased?
I think what he was playing on was to change the subject of his weak handling of the crisis in Charlottesville. He wanted to shift the topic away from his seeming quasi-sympathy to neo-Nazis, or at least equating them to peaceful protesters, so he went this monument route. George Washington and Thomas Jefferson are not going to be coming down right now. The question is, the Confederates were anti-American. They wanted to, they essentially committed acts of treason. And it is now being used, and these monuments that he calls historical were put up in the 1920s when the KKK swelled to 4 million people, and D.W. Griffith did the horrific pro-Klan movie Birth of a Nation, and there became this movement of putting Jim Crow laws in place, and it led to the birth of the NAACP and others, but some of these statues remain, and it's understandable why people of color find them offensive. We need to do what Barack Obama did. He saved Cesar Chavez's birthplace, or Harriet Tubman's site, or Stonewall in New York. Not, in my opinion, just start going Confederate mania here on us like the president did by praising Lee and Jackson.
You brought up the President Obama, and you bring up his just history and what he did in response to similar situations. And he tweeted this week, and clearly a lot of people in this country were looking to him for his response. Here's what he tweeted out. This is a photo of him smiling at 4 young children along with the Nelson Mandela quote, "No one is born hating another person because of the color of his skin or his background or his religion." This is now the most liked tweet ever. So obviously, President Obama made history as the first black president, but his post-presidency role remains undefined. What do you make of the strong reaction to that tweet of his?
Well, you see it in the Boston protests CNN's been covering all day. Peaceful protesters, people of all mixed races and ethnicities, trying to be march against hate. And so President Obama represents far more people than the fringe group of neo-Nazis and KKK white supremacist groups, and he didn't have to. He just quoted, Nelson Mandela and the world cheers. Right now, the United States is being looked at as weird and strange that we're having an argument over saving the symbol of Confederacy, which was about slavery, and it's such a bizarre moment. But I'm afraid the Trump movement seems blinded to it. So I hope the South and cities like Austin, where I'm at, where the University of Texas, Austin took down their Jefferson Davis statue, you saw it at Duke, that some of these statues start coming down, and hopefully the state governments of some southern states will recognize it's not worth keeping them in the long run.
Douglas Brinkley, thanks as always. And we have an incredible